Well, hello and welcome to the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about all things Unreal Engine and also professionally made mozzarella string cheese. We're your hosts. My name's Alex, and Jacob is still out, but I have a wonderful guest host with me. We have Tupac Martir, the one and only. Hello, Tupac.
Hello. How are we?
We're very well.
Long time no see.
Yeah, it's been a while. Tupac and I just got back from Unreal Fest Europe, and we have known each other for a while and have never actually had Tupac on the podcast. So this seemed like a great opportunity to bring him on, talk about Unreal Fest, talk about amazing things in general. He's been involved with so many amazing projects, and I'm excited for all our listeners to get to learn more about that. But first, before we let Tupac speak for himself, we have to do our word association. And I have to say the Jacob thing. Please be sure to comment, like, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. But word association. Are you ready, Tupac?
Go for it.
Let's do it. Home.
Lisbon.
Work.
Around the world.
Food.
Italian.
Travel.
What I do for a living.
Virtual production.
Pain in the ass that we were able to figure it out.
Great answer. Unreal Engine.
A whole bloody universe.
Fortnite.
Something that I'm too old to play.
Okay, and now we have a few questions. How do you take your coffee?
I take it in the sense that I don't drink coffee anymore. I stopped drinking coffee 2 years ago.
There you go. Favorite time of day?
It varies, but it's usually just as the sun's about to set. I mean, like I said, I live in Lisbon, so I get to see some of the most beautiful sunsets every single day. Seeing them from outside my home, I have a beautiful view through the river. So yeah, it's probably my favorite. And also, you know, the amount of shows that I've lit on sunset, it's amazing.
I was just thinking, like, as a lighting designer, I'm sure that's something you just have to create so often. Yeah, that makes sense. And then our final question is, when was the last time you remember laughing uncontrollably?
This morning. I was on my way in to the studio from the gym, and this is a weird story. About 7-8 years, it might even 10 years ago, a friend of mine invited me to the Royal Festival Hall when I was living in London to see Saint Etienne. And I love the band, you know, and I was like, yeah, Saint Etienne, lovely. So we go, and when we arrive to the Royal Festival Hall, it's a lovely place, and I've seen many bands there. And we go and we sit down and we're watching, you know, Saint Etienne comes out, and then one of the main songs comes up. And about 90% of the entire auditorium just got up and went, woo! To which, you know, for me and from a friend, Saint Etienne was a completely different type of band. And so this morning as I was coming in, Marianne Hobbs put it in the radio. And as soon as the first two chords came in, my only thing that I could think about was go, woo! In the middle of the street. And I just laughed all my way through until I arrived at the studio.
That's amazing. I love that. Great. Well, let's get into it. So I was trying to remember how we first met. And I believe Brandon Powers had connected us at a Verizon 5G event where there was some discussions about like the future of theater and all that. And I guess Brandon knew that you were looking for some help to bring Cosmos Within Us, which I had heard of at the time, to New York for a live show there. And I had heard rave reviews about this experience over in Venice. But then, of course, what you were going to do in New York was a little bit different. So let's start with that meeting, and then we'll zoom out more to the broader picture of who Tupac Martir is.
Yeah, I think that is the first time we met personally, like face to face. I guess yeah. I knew about you from Kira because of Love Seat,
right?
And
right.
You know, the whole thing that you were doing with her. And I spent a lot of time with Kira in 2019 in that Venice. We were the two pieces that had the most amount of people in the island. Nice. And so we kind of had to tag team each other to make sure that all our teams were fed and happy. And you know, it's not an easy feat to take that many people into an island and everything that it conveys. So yeah, I think that was the first time that I heard about you. And then we met at this Verizon space, and we realized that we had a lot of synergies in terms of what is it that performance means to us. You know, I think that you're probably one of the 5 people that I know in the world that is as how can I put it, emotionally attached to performance as I am, and bringing it to a new world. You know, I think there's a lot of people that care about performance, but I don't think there's that many people in the world that I see that are really passionate about the possibilities of what this can do, and how this is a true new medium for performance that can be explored and brought to a new audience.
Yeah, you and I care about it so much. It's almost to our detriment, to the point where it's like we want these things to work and be successful so much that it's like, forget any commercial viability, any kind of scalability. We just want to see these things come to life.
Exactly, and I think that I always say that there's a passion that needs to come through it, and we were having a discussion yesterday about this, about what makes you an artist, and we came up with this idea that the reason for it is you're trying to make things that are impossible, and that actually is the driver of it. And because it's impossible, you make all your body of work come around to trying to make possibility. You know, they're trying to make it a happening thing. And obviously, you know, you run into the wall. And you know, I always say that the job that I do is being a masochist, because you know that you're going to fail constantly. And most people try to avoid failure as much as you can. And it's almost like failure is like, no, you have to fail multiple times until you actually arrive to it. And sometimes you arrive to it and you realize that it's not as good as I expected it to be. But oh well, it's a step forward to what we're trying to make. You know, it's a very sadomasochistic way of living. But as I always say, then there's that moment that you reach something, you just go, this is amazing. This is fantastic. You know, this is going to change everything. I remember when I wrote in 2006 what became Nierka. And I remember writing that I wanted to, because we've all seen screens moving on stage, right? And there's always the same projector with one single image that needs to move from right to left in 15 seconds. And the people moving the screens are trying to move in 15 seconds, but they always miss it. And the video is either before it or afterwards. And that used to annoy the bejesus out of me. And I was saying that there must be a way of tracking objects in real time so that we can send this information and we can maintain that going. And you know, I explained that in 2006 and I wrote it, and it was not until 2011 that it finally, you know, we saw it happening. And on the 27th of December, I got a video that it was working. And then, you know, all the stuff got shipped to London, and eventually we did the show. And that first moment when screens moved and everything was keystoning properly and tilting and shifting and doing everything that it should do. And it was just like, wow, you know, I've seen the future. Like, I would never forget ever being in the rehearsal, and all of a sudden I just hear someone coming up the stairs and just going, you got to come out. And coming out and just, you know, looking at it and working. And the person right next to me going, you are insane. Like, this is not, like, I can see how much money you're putting into this whole thing. And you know, it's like, but I can see it now. You know, you know, Nigel from Green Hippo at the time was just, you know, I could see it in his eyes that he had just seen the future. He had just seen what the future of entertainment was going to be, you know. And so I think those are the things that you live for when you actually crack something and you go, yep, that's it. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. So this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and it sounds like, was 2006 kind of like your inflection point where you really had a sense of what the next, you know, 20 odd years of your career might start to look like? No,
not really. I wish. I think that I went to art school,
right?
I have a bachelor in fine arts in painting, drawing, photography, etching, and what it was called digital art in the late 90s. Which is very different to what we call digital art now. But, right. You know, it was this very, very analog to digital thing that I started playing with. and I remember when I was building all this new stuff when I was in school. I There's the story about the hands, and I made this two hands, in which this is going to sound hilarious, right? I put my hand in the lab, and it took me 3 hours to scan my hand at the DPI that I needed it, right? And then I went to the toilet, and then when I did the second hand, and then I used tracing paper, and I traced my hand completely, and then I scanned with tracing paper both of those hands, and then I went to the lab and took a couple of pictures that I had from my negatives, and I developed those, and then I did a couple of drawings with my hand on top of that drawing, and then scratched the negative in the correct way, and then took a picture of that, and then blew that up, and then brought that back into the lab, and then using, at the time, very early Photoshop, started playing with layers, and then put this really like soft type of paper on top of my hand, and then retraced my hand on top of that, and then went back to the lab and reprinted the picture and did something. So it was like this process that probably took me about 5-6 months. And then eventually we started printing, and then the printing, went through, and then eventually these hands were like 2 by 2 meters. And I brought them back to my studio, and I hung them in my studio. And this is like, at this point, I'm like 15 days away from my first solo show, which was going to have 35 images, between paintings and drawings and etchings and things like that. And I asked John Thien, who was my mentor, who, bless his soul, to come and see them. But he was giving class. He was giving a life drawing class, which I was supposed to be in that class at that point, but I wasn't, because I had to go and pick up the other stuff. So anyway, I'm like, John, you gotta come see this. You gotta come see this. You gotta come see this. And John's like, I'm teaching Tupac. I was like, but you gotta come see this. You gotta come see this. Like, give me a break. In the break, I'll come over. Okay. So then I timed it as the break, and I go see. I was like, come on, John. And John's teaching. He's like, okay. It's like, okay, give me a minute. And so he goes with me, and we walk into my studio. My studio had this really long corridor to come in. And then you walk in, and it was the main part of the space. And I had like 4 paintings that were in the other walls, and a big mural that I was making. And then he turns around, and he's like, what am I to look at? And I show him the hands. And he just looks at it and turns around to me and storms out of my studio and just goes, "Fuck you." And I went, "So that mean you like it?" "Fuck you." It's like, "So you really like it?" And then I brought the other 2 professors that used to correct me on a regular basis, and they both were like, "What in the world have you done?" And at that moment I was like, okay, so that's where I'm at. I'm in this space of analog and digital, and using traditional techniques and combining them with elements and new digital and new technology. And this is what my career path is going to be for the next 65 years of my life.
At least. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
At least. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Were there signs before then of like, it seems like that's the moment where you kind of felt like, yes, this is how it all works, and this is where I feel most at home. Were there also signs before that, maybe from when you were a child or coming up, where you were also starting to play in some of these different sandboxes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I told you this. So I always say that that I was not poor, because I was very much loved by my mother, but we were financially challenged.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have a lot. My mom worked 2 jobs, and we used to live in Mexico City, and it wasn't exactly the easiest thing, and so I was, because of my nature of who I am, and the way that I was, which people wouldn't realize it nowadays, I was very quiet and not very flamboyant, not very out there. So I always kept to myself, mainly because, we didn't have any money, which means I couldn't go out to any of the places that people used to go out, and things like, I couldn't go to the park. Like, you could go to the park, but like, the picnics and all those kinds of things. If it meant that my mother had to spend money, I would rather not go, even if I got invited. So that made me very, very reclused in the way that I was. And out of things that you kind of have a little bit of money one day coming back, I bought a magazine on basic. And so I started to learn how to code on BASIC and ASCII when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And so I there's a reason I carry one of these everywhere I go, and it's because I code on my notebooks. So I didn't have time to learn on computers. I had to learn how to code on the notebook, and I would clean my code on notebooks, and then we could afford 1 hour on the computer every Wednesday. And so I would go to a computer and I would try to have my code as clean as possible to make sure that my code worked. And then because I was a nerd, I became friends with kids that were really cool for school. And so they became my friends so that I can help them. And I was cool about it because they had a Commodore 64. Mm-hmm. And so I could learn how to code, and like I could play on a Commodore 64. So while they were playing, ping pong and whatever, I was just on the Commodore learning and doing things and trying things. So all of a sudden, it's like I have a computer 24/7, like not 24/7, but every time I come to this guy's house, they're making sandwiches. I don't care. They're playing football. I don't care. I get to code, and so that was kind of my thing. And I always tell people that I look at technology as the same way that you look at your childhood friend. Because it was there all this time and it helped me. And, I wrote my first game when I was 7. Wow. And then as lo and behold, because, I lived in Mexico. So getting games wasn't exactly the easiest thing. Let me rephrase that. Getting games legally wasn't the easiest thing. So I became friends with the guys. There were 2 brothers who used to sell pirate PC games. And one day, I think I was about 10 years old, my mom would take me there on Thursday. So I used to pay for myself by bagging groceries. So from the age of 6, I started bagging groceries for people. In Mexico, it's very common that children basically go over there and you sit there. They're called matches, cerillos. And so you bag the groceries for somebody, and then you take them to the car and they give you a little bit of money. And, that now I realized very early that all the kids will arrive at like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. So I would be taken at 6 a.m. so I could be there, and I would do as many people as I could before, once the game became like 10, 11, I was done, because there were too many kids at that point. It's like, you're going to get one for every hour. And I was like, that's not worth my money. So at that point I would leave. And so I used to spend my money by going my mom would take me to like the market. And so I met these 2 guys, and they will basically go to the US, buy games, and then come back and then just basically pirate them and sell them that way. And one day I was sitting in the stall trying to choose a game when I said, this older man, he was probably like 25 at that point, but I was 10. So, for me, he was an adult. Asked them what to do in this bit or something like that. And I was like, oh, what you need to do is this, and that. He was like, oh, cool. And then he was trying to pick a game. And I was like, I wouldn't pick that. I would pick that one because if you like that other game, you should probably play this because this is very... And obviously the 2 brothers really quickly went, wait a second, we're missing a beat here. Oh, no. So they turned to my mom and they were like, would you mind if your son comes and works for us rather than bagging groceries in the morning? And so every weekend, my mom would drop me off now at 9 a.m. with these guys. And I would sit in the stall. And my job was basically to play games during the week so I could tell people, later I learned that Nintendo had people like this and Sega has people for this. But right. In Mexico, obviously, we don't have it. So I was one of those people that used to tell. But because of that, one of them was a lecturer in computer science. And so I started showing him my code and the games, and so he started teaching me and giving me more books to learn. So not only would I go home with games, he will also give me like things to study. So I would go to school like every single kid, but I would finish my homework really, really quickly. And then I would just sit there and learn all these different things. And eventually he had an Amiga. And so one day a week, I was allowed to go to their home. I mean, think about it. I mean, this is how horrible it sounds, right? I was an 11-year-old going to a guy who's about 32 years old to play with his console. Like, this is Mexico at the end of the day. That's why it doesn't sound really weird. And so he would let me go and code in his Amiga. and I would code in the Amiga and learn, and and I would see. And sometimes when I was on holidays, he would allow me to go in and sit down in his classes and things like that. So that's how I kind of learned how to code and how to understand this entire different world. So for me, it just became something that is inherited in the way that I understand it. And I don't code anymore, but I can still look at code and go, well, that doesn't look correct, or that bit over there. I had to do this thing for a project, and I just needed to script something. And the guys in the studio were looking at my script, and they were like, "You write so funny." And I was like, "That's how I learned to code, guys." But which is really, really funny, because now that USD has finally appeared and become an element of our world, the fact that you can do an USDA and you can actually look at the ASCII code, like, it's sending me back, 40 odd years now, that we're looking at the ASCII code and I'm like, oh, screw it, I can just fix it here. I don't even have to open anything. Just open the script and I can just sit there and clean it up and make it look the way that I want it without having to open a single thing in Unreal or an Omnibus. I can just fix it all in code, which is great.
That's incredible. I have to ask.
Long story.
So, yeah. Oh, no, it's amazing. So I'm hearing so much about like the technical side of how you became, a coder, and there's this awesome nerddom to the whole thing. But also, I know there had to have been a very clear artistic spark along the way as well. So, like, let's start with making your first video game when you were 7. Did that feel more like a technical kind of thing, or did you even then feel more of the creative and artistic side of it as well?
I would say that I didn't feel creative at the time. My parents are both economists, so numbers are a big thing in my family. My mom, who passed away, she passed away with 5 masters and a PhD. My father has 3 PhDs and 2 masters. His last PhD was at the age of 75 in mathematics.
Amazing.
So there's a lot of numbers that we thought that's where I'm really good at. My mom always gave me culture because she thought that it was good to make me a rounded human being. We used to go to the orchestra every Sunday and the cheap seats and just watch, and listen to the orchestra, which, being mathematical, music was amazing. But I think she just did it to kind of maintain me on a normal way. And it was not until, I would say, the first time that I thought, oh, I can do something like this is when I was like 14, 15 years old in my art class, where I did something all made out of points. Of course I made it out of points. There was no lines, there was no drawing, there was no etching. It was just using points in order to make an image. Which, when I look at point clouds, it's really funny because all I can think about is like, okay, this is, put it to me in plain and let's look at it. And it was not until we moved to Italy, when my mom was a diplomat, that she gave me a camera, mainly because she thought, you're going to be traveling around Europe. You want to take pictures for, that you can remember for the rest of your life, without ever thinking that I would be traveling for the rest of my life. But I became, once again, because I was still very reclusive. I was very, 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 very much not a very sociable person. I used the camera to kind of let me become this personable human being. And in Italy, it's actually where everything that you see nowadays kind of comes alive. But I used that camera so much that I could take pictures without looking through the mirror. Like I didn't have to look through the viewer. I could take pictures just because I became so close to that camera. And then going into the dark room and understanding the dark room and understanding the printing techniques and all the other elements that go into it, that's truly when I started feeling that, okay, there's something in here. When I applied to college, I applied to do psychology with a minor in art, thinking that photography was going to be like a thing that I did. And then I think it was my second semester in college when I was like, screw it, I don't want to be reading about people. I want to be learning about people. And the only way I know how to learn about people is taking pictures and doing this. I was very blessed. I was taught very early by a professor, by Father Don Dole, who's a priest from the Society of Jesus, but he was also a photographer for National Geographic. And so when I committed to go to Creighton, one of the things that he promised me was that I was allowed to skip photography 101, 201, and 301. So I could go straight to 401 with him to do photojournalism. And so, he took me to the reservoir, and I was with the Lakotas for 2 weeks, and I developed film. And one of the pictures that I developed in that film made it to the cover of National Geographic, and it was just like, this is fantastic. This is what I want to do. But then that's when I changed my major to art. And they were like, well, if you're going to change your major to art, you need to start from scratch. So you need to take Art 101, Art 102, Art 103, live drawing, all those kinds of things. And I took live drawing class. I took Art 101 with Bob Bosco, who eventually became one of my professors. And I liked it, but I wasn't thrilled by it. And then on my fourth semester at college, I had to take live drawing classes. And that's where I met John. And my life changed. All of a sudden, I met this amazing human being in John Thien, who, God knows what the hell he saw, but he saw something. And I ended up shifting my main professor, who was a photography professor, to John. And from there, it was just like, the only way I can put it is a very Karate Kid kind of thing, where he expected so much out of me to do, but I would sit at his studio for 2 or 3 nights every week and watch him work, so I could understand the process of working, the process of being an artist, and I became his assistant. And then one day he was like, right, see that line, that line, that line, yeah, I want him on that canvas. And so I had to do that. And I moved him, and then I showed up the following day. He said, this is my canvas, that's your canvas. Here we go. And then literally in a Mr. Miyagi kind of thing, he will tie my right hand, he will tie my left hand. He will only let me do lines with one, points with the other, cold colors, warm colors, and all these things, so that his entire approach was technique cannot be a disruptor. It has to be, you have to feel so comfortable that whatever is in your mind, you're able to achieve it, because the technique is not a problem. And that's really when, this is I would say my fourth and fifth semester in college were probably the hardest, because he was just so on me to get this right. And then once I hit that space, it was just like, go. And, then it was all about my creativity, all about the things that I could do, the way that I would grab a ceramics technique or an etching technique and bring it into painting, or bring it into drawing and bring it photography, going into, doing 3D, like literal 3D world, not computer 3D world. So working with big machines and grinding and polishing and doing all this like physical elements and analog that really, really made me understand how things behave, how things do. And that was, and I always say that I am thankful to John, because he is the reason I am who I am. And so, he passed away a year ago. We did a show at Sonar a month and 10 days after he had passed away, and we dedicated that show to him, because he truly had always this thing. And one of the funniest things, I was talking to his widow the other day, because I talk to her on a regular basis. Every time I do something, every time I win something, I let her know that something's going on. And apparently, I used to have a boombox in my studio when I was in college. And when I left my studio, obviously I left the US, so I couldn't bring anything. And I left my boombox, and he took that boombox and put it in his studio. And he used to listen to that every single day and use it, because it was a way for him to be connected to me, which I always thought was really, really nice, and tells you about the bond that I had with this human.
That's amazing. What kind of music would come out of that boombox?
Oh my God, take a guess. It will be, this is the late 90s. So, yeah. There's a lot of really good hip hop. There's a lot of really good, there's a lot of really good grunge and that kind of thing. But also being Mexican, I remember, especially when I was painting, there was a lot of things that needed to come out of this Mexican side of me. So I was listening to a lot of Mexican bands, a lot of traditional Mexican music. It was just something that called me. a lot of 80s sounds from the radio will come through, and a lot of mixtapes that I used to find. And also late 90s is the beginning of of all the torrents and all the type of things that we were using at the time. So it was, there's a lot of Napster that made it to my boombox.
Yeah. I want to ask you, because there's of course a very contentious discussion now about AI and the ability for someone to just type in a prompt and generate whatever they want. But what I think you're demonstrating so well with your history so far is this fundamental foundational understanding of the tools, the ASCII code, touching all these artistic mediums, literally getting your hands dirty with figuring out how to use all of them. And then, of course, that eventually goes on to inform the actual digital art you're doing. Do you think anyone nowadays who comes to art of any kind, primarily using AI tools, is missing out by not doing some of those things that you did?
I'm not going to say that there's, my generation did it better. I don't think it's that. I think that there's a beauty about drawing things out. There's a beauty about working it out on a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And even if it's just a sketch, just to kind of get the dimensions right, and just to kind of get the feeling of what that space needs to look like, that for me is a very needed way of doing it. Like I like to do things analog and kind of work it out first, and then go in and, because I'll be lying if I said I didn't use any of the tools that are out there. Of course I do. And when GPTs came to be, I spent 2 weeks of my life learning how to write a GPT.
Sure. Yeah.
And like grinding it out. And I wrote about 15 or 20 GPTs in that period of time to the point that now it's part of my workflow. Mm-hmm. I write GPTs for every new thing that I'm doing. I write a GPT that holds all the information, that has all these elements, so that, I'm currently working on the piece where I have 32 different teams that are working with me. So rather than spending my day answering questions, is like, I've made a GPT. If you have a question, first of all, ask the GPT. If it can't answer it, then come to me. But I would say 99% of the questions that they ask are answered. And if they're not answered and they ask me and I go, is that not in the GPT? No, then I go in and I write an entire document that I can then fit into the GPT, So it's like, oh, okay, I missed that bit. Hold on a second. But like the other day, someone was asking, we finished the meeting, and I was like, just go and look at it and see. And basically they could go into it and realize the amount of assets, the type of assets, how the assets were going to be used, what were their interactions with the different actors, what were the interactions with the different people from my GPT.
Wow.
And that makes it, so easy for someone just to go and say, wait, what happens in the scene? What are the assets that I need to make? What are the assets that are missing? Have we, because we also maintain a list there that goes assets that have been made. So then it fits all constantly into it. So there's an entire evolution of it. It takes time to build it, and obviously it takes time to maintain it. But if you can do that, then it becomes a massive element that can help you, And so, to go back to what you were saying, I had a conversation one day with one of the guys in the studio, and he was saying, well, what happens if I put, a prompt and I get exactly the image that I want? And I was like, well, listen, if you do that, you probably should go and buy a lotto ticket, because the chances of that happening are pretty minute, no? And he was like, well, what if I wrote this really big description that is like 65 pages, and he has everything like a Tolkien way that I explain every single element that exists, blah, blah, blah. And I go, if you do that, the piece of art is your essay that explains what you want. At that point, the AI, all it's doing is exactly the same thing that somebody else that I will hire to tell them exactly the way that I want an image. But, your piece of art is actually the essay that you've written, because you've just written a 65-page essay to describe an image, Yeah. And so I'm a big believer on that side of things. And I'm a big believer of, I really like using Comfy, for example. I think Comfy UI is a great way of actually doing things, because then you're controlling things. You can control nets, and you can do all sorts of different things, and the way that you use negative prompts, and, being able to control the jacket or the phase or the pose. So, all those elements that then you're not leaving as much to whatever is going to be happening between the model and whatever you come out with, but rather having a big control over what's happening in the image, right? Or in the music, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, one of the things that we did during pandemic, we started writing, because we wrote our first LLM in 2017.
Wow.
And so and in 2019, after we finished Cosmos, actually, right before I met you, right as we were about to when we were going to New York, we started writing the LLM that I wanted to do, because I wanted to come out of let's say the boundaries of what Cosmos was in terms of performance. And I wanted to explore what would happen if I went outside of it. And so that's when we started writing the LLM that we use for composing. And so that was kind of the first time that we delve into a very heavy type of LLM. And, the way that we treated that eventually, because, pandemic happened, so that means we had more time than I expected to actually train an LLM. Rather than going in and trying to find stems that I liked, I will pay musicians to do sessions. So I would do sessions where they were at home and I was on the other side, and they will perform for 45, 50 minutes for me, just playing the bass or playing the guitar, whatever. And then we would use those stems to feed into into our model, so that the model understood the type of music that I liked, the way that I wanted to compose, and that's kind of where this 24 hand signals kind of came from. So it became an evolution of all that process, so it's still a very, very human element of it, and I think that's the part is, if you just give it to a machine and a machine doesn't, then that's not correct. I think if you maintain this element of, okay, I have an idea, I give it to the model, to the AI, it gives it back to me, I do something else, I find it back, taking it, very similar to the way that I did my hands. It was like this process of going back and forward, back and forward, back and forward, so that the AI is more of a helper or an assistant, or, we all know that. I mean, I wrote my entire dissertation about the idea that Leonardo da Vinci didn't exist, not in the way that we think that he exists, because, they had a lot of helpers. They had a lot of assistants, and so if you look at them as tiny new assistants that you can use, then that's the way that in a certain way, we're going back to the Renaissance, to using people as assistants in the way that they used to be used as assistants back in the day.
It's a great analogy. Yeah, like a lot of people don't know, Michelangelo did not paint the Sistine Chapel. He was overseeing, all of his assistants painting the Sistine Chapel. And yes, there's certain parts that he took ownership over, but that's such a great analogy with AI and treating it as assistants. Now, of course, all these tools, there's still kind of a sense of garbage in, garbage out, and you need to have a sense of taste and style and curation, and you need to know what you want to get out of these things for them to be useful. Now, you, of course, have built up your sense of taste through all these years of tools and kind of keeping right on the bleeding edge of what's possible. But for someone who's starting out now, let's say there's someone listening right now who is just in school, maybe they're in art school, and they're trying to figure out how to develop their sense of self, taste, their artistic sensibilities. What would you recommend they do to start to develop, who they are in that respect?
This is going to sound like I am the most pretentious son of a bitch in the entire world, right? Stop looking at things. It's. I think a lot of the work that I see nowadays is very derivative from things. Especially in VR, I see a lot of derivative work.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's because you're only looking at certain things and you're not really looking outside, other spaces. Like right now we're building a new piece, and yes, the main piece is done in Unreal, but it talks to 8 different softwares that have nothing to do with Unreal. Right. Like literally have nothing to do with Unreal in order to create the thing that I want to do. And so I think this idea of break away from the box. I got told the other day, oh, you think outside the box? No. I think very much inside the box. It just happens that my box is 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. And for Americans, sure. It's like a mile by a mile. It's like I have a very, very big box. And so I just allow things to come into that box whenever I want it. and I'm very good at segmenting. I'm very good at putting myself into positions where I go, I was doing this thing for Apple last year, and it was single space, and I was just doing lighting, and I needed to create I needed the room to look very different for 3 different artists, even though I was using pretty much the same lights for all 3 of them. And so I created an entire chart of saying, right, for this artist, we're only allowed to use this colors and this type of movements and this type of things and this type of, okay. For the second artist, we're only allowed to do this, 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 and for the third artist, we're only allowed to do this, 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 and this. And even though my programmers wanted to kill me because they're like, oh, you're telling me, like, no, I'm just making sure that each artist has such a language that they're going. And when you're looking at that through an entire hour, you can see that's the language of this artist and that's the language on this artist, And I think that's the main thing is you need to, just because it's available and you can use it doesn't mean you have to, It's just like what feels comfortable, what feels nice, what are the things that if you just take 2 things, what can you build with those 2 things? If then you can take an element, and this comes from performance. You can take something, and I'm making you believe this, and then I'm going to introduce a third thing, or I'm going to break one of my rules, and I'm doing it for dramatic reasons, right? But I'm not doing it right away. I'm doing it at different paces, and so this idea of how can you just grab something as simple as a cube and make something different out of it? What can you do with it to make it look like yours? Because at the end of the day, we're all unique. We all have something about the way that we were raised, the way that we live, the people that we live around, the music that we listen to. We all have elements that allow us to have that uniqueness. And so the question is, how do you want that uniqueness to be expressed out of you? And that will never come from derivative. By all means, if you see something and you really like it, try to do it. And then once you get it, then break it, but break it in your own rules.
Yeah, I love that. We're doing a pretty good job here of teasing out basically your life story. And I want to keep going on that a little bit. So you're in college. We mentioned your dissertation. We mentioned getting photography on National Geographic. Amazing. We haven't talked much yet about light and your relationship with light and how that maybe started to lead toward a career that was really guided by that. Let's just keep going with the life story here.
Sure. So light became a weird thing in my life. I originally thought that I was going to be more of a production designer or an art director. So at the age of 26, I became art director of MTV in Latin America, which was everything you wanted to be and exactly knowing how not to do television. I guess is the best way of putting it. Because, I think about it right now, our head, like our executive producer, like our boss was 34 years old, right? And then underneath it, you had all these producers that were in their mid to late 20s. There wasn't that many people that were above 30 in that group. And you're talking about MTV Latam. So there's about 40 of us, right? Making shows daily for multiple parts of the channel and whatever you want to do it. So it was like this huge summer camp kind of thing, and it was also Mexico City. The moment it was vibrant and the bands and everything that was going on. And I remember doing various sets that I thought looked amazing. And then the gaffer at the time, or the lighting designer, just doing things that I didn't really like. Mm. And I was like, and then he would do certain things on other sets that I didn't think were that good. And just the lighting would just enhance them. And I was like, I need to learn that. I need to learn how to do that. And so I went to, I had become friends with bands and their teams. So I kind of tagged along with some friends that started teaching me about lighting. And then I went, all the way to the back. So I started like, how do you rig a light? How do the lights behave? So I could understand all this. And then eventually moved to the front to understand, how do you program lights? What's a palette? How do you put things together? How does a wash behave different to, I know how much a wash weighs and I know how much a profile weighs, but what are the biggest differences that they have and elements like that, how can I use a Fresnel? How can I focus this? And that kind of gave me a new language of doing things. And from there, it was one of those things where all my friends were saying, as soon as you understand this thing, you're gonna really love it, because then it's like painting in live. You're painting live on a 3D space, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. And out of just one of those things, a friend of mine asked me to come and see a band, and I was like, okay, sure. I went to see the band. I really liked them. And she was like, we're going to do a show at the Hard Rock. Would you like to do it? And I was like, I've never programmed a show in my entire life. She was like, no, but I'm sure that you can figure it out. And I was like, yeah, I can figure it out. And so and then the band that was going to play before them sent me an email also and said, hey, we heard you doing Austin. Can you do us? And I was like, sure. And all of a sudden, so I've gone from doing one band and I'm doing two bands. So that, I came, like, once again, I came from the opera house. I came from this thing. So obviously I have an entire notebook that has all my cue stacks and, how I need to follow them in the way that you would in an opera. And I did this two bands. And because I came from this performance-based, thing that we used to do, and coming from a very artistic vision, I made them look very different. And all of a sudden it was like, no, you're staying with us. And so I started working with, at that point, became the two hottest indie bands in Mexico, and the affluence that they had, and the way that we got to play with Mogwai, and we got to play with Ratatat, and we got to play with all these different bands, and that just kind of like enhanced my idea of what light could be, and the bands and the music. So it has a massive, massive repercussion in the way that I see art. And so when I moved to London, because I was like, I want to test myself in London. I think I'm good enough. Here's me not really knowing what the hell I'm talking about. And so when I moved to London, I was 30. I was about to turn 31.
Yeah.
So I left everything behind me in Mexico, and I moved to the UK thinking, two bags and my pride, thinking that I can make it in here. And so I started looking for, talking to people and trying to see things. And all of a sudden it was like, someone at a rental house said, why should I hire you when I have a list of 50 people that I can hire who have done the job for me before? And I was like, you have a point. So if you need me to start in the warehouse, I'll start in the warehouse. Like I'll do whatever you need. I'm comfortable enough to know that as soon as I get an opportunity, I'll be able to step up to that one. And so one thing led to another. And one day I got a phone call saying that I did something for the BBC with Justice that looked really, really cool. And then that got me another job. And then eventually I get this phone call saying that this designer is doing a show for London Fashion Week, and he's going to have something like 360 fixtures to do a spiral. And they wanted to know if I could come in and program that, because, at that point I had learned very well how to program, and, 350 fixtures in the way that it needed to be is a bit complicated. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come and do it. And as life would have it, I'm sitting there and I'm trying to, I put everything as much as I can in the way that I understand I'm going to be needed. And the lighting designer walks in, and it's this Italian guy called Manolo. And Manolo has Marco. Marco is his translator, because Manolo doesn't speak. Well, at the time, he didn't speak very good English. And so he turns around to Marco and says, "Dì al programmatore che abbiamo bisogno di fare questo." And so I hear it, and I'm just like, okay. So I start programming that. And so before even Marco comes and tells me what to do. And then he says something else, and I'm just reacting. And all of a sudden, Manolo just turns around and goes, "Wait, you speak Italian?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Great." And so that started this really, at the time, beautiful relationship of us working together. And he took me to Paris to work with him, and then I will work with him back in London. And so I learned how to light fashion. And so all of a sudden I have this idea of how to light music and how to light fashion and how to light art. And, little by little moved into architecture and all these different elements of how to understand light. And up until this point, I still think that I get asked to light things because I light them in my own style of the things that I like and the things that I don't like. And I bring a different approach to it. Because there's always said that there's two ways that you become a lighting designer. One of them is by pushing boxes, and from pushing boxes to hanging, from hanging to this, slowly make yourself up to the desk and then program. And then there's people that went to art school and then learned how to program and build their stuff that way. And it's like, I went to art school and I also learned how to push boxes. So I have this really weird concept of how light behaves and how to make it work that just happens to be liked by a lot of people. And I've been blessed to have worked with, with Vivienne Westwood and Alexander McQueen and Elton John and Beyonce and a lot of other people that have just enriched my career in some amazing ways.
Yeah, it did sound like Elton John's plane was a really happening place to be. Sounds like he was really nice to you guys.
It was fun. It was enjoyable.
And I have to ask too, when did you come across Jules Fisher?
I met, actually, Jules is someone who I met in 2007. So when I started really getting into light, like everybody else, I would go to the internet and try to find as much as I could. And I used to read Live Design International. I used to read the magazine. And the more that I was getting into light, all of a sudden I saw the lighting master classes. And I was like, oh, I want to go. And so I went to the 2007 lighting masterclass, in which I met Willie Williams and I met a bunch of other people that have become really good friends of mine in the industry. But I remember they took us to see Spring Awakening, and I remember looking up and just going, wow, there's like 190, 200 fixtures up there for this. I get asked to light plays in Mexico with like what's in the front part of the, like with 15 or 20 elements. And so I remember telling Jules that I thought the whole masterclass was fantastic. And Beverly Emmons, I don't know if you've ever taken her class, is like the most amazing class a human being can take on color. Cool. Right? It's just, it blows your mind. It's 45 minutes where you think you're seeing something, and she tells you, no, your eyes are tricking you. Your eyes are tricking you. Your eyes are tricking you. And I remember finishing that whole, and I remember telling Jules saying, I think this is amazing. It's great to see how all the professionals work, but I would love to see a masterclass from somebody who's lit an award-winning play or award-winning performance with a very small budget, and eventually I learned that's what Showlight is for. Showlight is exactly about people from all the different parts of lighting talking about how light can be done in different levels for different types of things, and so I would say if anyone cares about light, go to Showlight next year. It's going to be somewhere in France, and it's the most amazing. Like, I remember going in 2009 and learning about how the presidential debates were being lit.
Oh, interesting.
And all and somebody else was talking. That's when I met Andy Watson from Radiohead, and he was talking about how he did, all the different designs he did for Radiohead. I remember someone talking about a water park, and somebody else about how they were lighting, an architectural space. And so it was all these different ways of seeing how light could behave. And one of them was in 2013, Danielle Feinsberg from Pixar came to talk to us about how she lit movies for Pixar, and all of a sudden it was like, it opened my mind. So when I started working in 3D, when I started working in Unreal, she was one of the first people that I messaged. And I was like, okay, so I'm dwelling into this game engine thing. Explain me now how all of this works for light, and having that very close element of her explaining was really, really interesting, and understanding how real life light, because I know how real life behaves. How do I transmit that into what I'm doing in a 3D space? So that's kind of the long story about how I met Jules.
Yeah.
And then obviously I met him when I came to see you in New York. Properly,
yeah, I don't know if I've actually mentioned Jules on the podcast before. So very quick background. So I came from working at Fisher Dax Associates, which, not unlike the story Tupac's giving us, Jules had started as just a Broadway lighting designer, but then he became someone who people were asking, like, hey, can you light this building, or can you help us design this new theater? And so he ended up creating Fisher Moran Stone for architectural lighting and Fisher Dax Associates for theater planning, with everything from the rigging to the lighting to the actual layout. So I was an architectural consultant at Fisher Dax Associates before co-founding Agile Lens with Josh Dax of Fisher Dax Associates. So I've been, working next to Jules for the past 12 years of my life, and it's some of my favorite conversations to eavesdrop on. And he's a brilliant designer. He has 9, Tony Awards now from lighting design, and also just has such a great sense of like what makes a show work and how the magic of good lighting can help bring things to life.
And he's got an amazing partner with Peggy.
Yeah,
also the way that
Peggy Eisenhower.
Yeah, I mean the way that she cues a show. I mean, my God, she has an eye. Of no, that's half a second too early. That's this. Can you delay this bit? One of the biggest things I learned from her was how to make a proper blackout.
Oh, really?
Because you think and this is the stupidity of one. You're going, okay, yes, I'm doing a blackout, so I'll do 100 to 0 in 6 seconds, right? And so it goes to a blackout, but for some reason it doesn't feel like it, right? And so where she goes is she says, no, you go 100 to 30 in 5.5 seconds. And then you go 30 to 0 in 0.5 because your eye doesn't have enough time to adjust. And so then you create a true blackout. The little things like that, those are the things that you learn in these tiny elements that you kind of go, oh, that's, okay, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
It's always the tiny little things. I always say, especially in these master classes, it's never the big strokes. It's the tiny little minute details that you go, that's how you do that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Where did Satori Studio come from?
Satori comes from my accountant, basically. As I said, I moved to London in 2008, and so I worked as a freelancer 2008, 2009, 2010. And as 2010 is finishing, my accountant calls me one day and goes, right, we need to have a talk. And I thought he was going to tell me that I owed like millions of pounds or something like that.
Right.
And he just went, no, listen, so first year you invoice for this much, and second year you invoice for this much. Third year, I'm predicting you're going to finish invoicing for this much, which means you're now over the threshold, and you're going to end up paying more VAT than you should, and you have no way of claiming it back. So it's time to open a company. Also because I was asking a lot of people to kind of go in and help me with shows, and so I was paying them, but I was not getting no VAT, and I was renting things, and so he's like, no, before anything goes further, it's time to open a company. And so I had to open Satori in 2011, also because we knew that Nierka was coming. And so he was like, in order to make all things clear, this is the best way of doing it. And so that's kind of when I had to open the company. And my first employee is now a director in the company, who's Muli, who is now the head of lighting and video at the studio. And that's kind of how it hit to happen, and then it was just one of those things where one thing led to another. And, there was a moment in 2019 where we were 50 people plus 10 freelancers. And you just kind of sit there and you go, at which moment did we move from being 3 dudes in a garage to being 60 people with, massive amounts of office space and contracts and, NDAs that are, I have one NDA that is 350 pages. And you're just like, I went to art school. Every time I talk, we have to get a new lawyer, a new accountant. Every time I always have to start with the same things, like just whatever you say and whenever you think about, and if you say which kind of dumbass will ever do things like this, just remember one thing: I went to art school, and that's why eventually, I got a CEO, because I was like, okay, I guess I have to be an adult. So I have an adult in the room now every single time. But, it's that thing of, I went to art school. Most people that went to art school that I know don't finish this thing that I'm doing at the moment. So, that's kind of where the studio comes in. And it's and Satori is it's a word that I learned when I was 15 years old, which is something that is beautiful, but it's not perfect. And I was like, yeah, that works. It's the moment right before you arrive to nirvana. It's just right underneath it, And with this idea that I'm a big believer that perfection is unachievable. So, you can only try to get there. Doesn't mean you're going to get there. So it becomes almost like a way of living and saying, yeah, we're going to try our hardest, but we understand that achieving perfection is impossible.
Yeah. Now, did I hear correctly that you are not the CEO of Satori Studio?
That is correct. I am not the CEO.
So this is really interesting because we have a lot of discussions on the podcast about, figuring out where my strengths are, where my weaknesses are, and how to like find a team that balances all that out. And I think a lot of people, especially if they found a company, they do feel like, well, the only way I can really guide the vision of this company is if I am the CEO, or you find someone who you really trust. So walk me through a little bit, deciding how you think of yourself within the Satori Studio framework, and then how you assembled kind of the right leadership team to do the things that you don't want to do or aren't as good at as they are.
I think that a lot of it came from. So this is one of those, once again, one of those things where you go, Jesus, sometimes I do have a vision. In 2017, 16, yeah, 2016, yeah, 2016, I was sharing a small office with a friend of mine. And this is April 2016. Sorry, August 2016. And I had an idea of where I wanted to be, but at the time I had done NERCA in 2012, which basically ripped me to pieces because of the financial crisis and everything that had happened. So, long story short, I was broke. And I was broke for a long period of my life. But I was just finally coming out of that, and things were always happening, but it was just very, very difficult, because you're paying massive debts, and so you never feel like you have a stronghold in what you're doing. And I knew at that point, as I was sharing this office with a friend of mine, and he had 3 desks in that office, and another friend of ours had 2 desks, and I had 1 desk. Right, because I was like the one that needed 1 desk, and so as 2016 begins, as September of 2016 begins, I'm doing quite a big set of shows, so I need a couple people to help me. So they start coming and working with me in the studio. Now, all of a sudden, like I said, I only have 1 desk, so the 3 of us are crammed into 1 little desk as we're working through. And I was having conversations for a few other pieces of projects that were coming along. And that December of 2016, I got asked to be in a trip to China for the UK government to talk about VR. And as I was over there, it was, I was there with Framestore, MPC, a bunch of the big hitters of VR at the time, and then a lot of people from VFX and, the Royal Shakespeare Company. And there's all these people that you just go in, like I am the only independent studio here, like I'm a tiny studio of 4, I guess, at that point. And one of the funniest stories is I had a Chinese man show up with $1 million on the briefcase to invest in my company.
Wow.
To which I was just like, I don't think I can do this. Something tells me that this is not the way that it works. And at the time, Ruben was our handler within the UK government. And he kind of looked at it and went, right, this is nuts, right? He's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, explain. And so he worked with me on my pitch of the company and what we're trying to do and things like that. So when we came back from China, I maintained conversations with Ruben, and I was like, I know where I'm going to take this company. I know where I want to be with this company. Even though we were, like I said, 4 people, 3 of us Mexicans, and we were called the Mexican Mafia. And Muli was dating a Mexican who was now his wife. So technically he was Mexican too. And so, so you have all this, and we're quirky and we're weird. And yes, we have big clients and we're designing weird shows. And so, Ruben kind of looked at us like, listen, do you mind coming in and doing 1 day a week with us just to kind of put things in shape? Because I know there's something coming big and I don't want to be caught, badly. So he was like, yeah. So he started working with us 1 day a week. And then that turned into 2 days a week. And then all of a sudden it was like, right, we're about to sign the biggest deal of my entire life. And so I went to him and I was like, we're about to grow like I have no idea. I was like, I can't deal with this. I am very, very good at coming up with ideas. I'm very, very good at being on site. I can present, I can draw, I can do a lot of things, but what I can't do is I can't do people management. I don't understand the intrinsic elements that come by being a CEO, of having to deal with all these things. And if I'm going to be dragged to do presentations and do all these other things, we need to figure out how we're going to grow this company. And so a year, basically in August of 2017, he joined as CEO. And 2 months later, maybe 3 months later, we signed this massive deal. And so we moved into a new space in August of 2017. And I remember moving into that space and going, oh, we have so much space. We're never going to fill this up. Cut to a year later and just like, we need more desks. Wow. There was literally a delivery of IKEA desks every single week for about 5 months. We just kept on hiring people and hiring people and hiring people. We couldn't hire people enough, and so this idea of how do we, and he's the one that kind of took into stride, not only at first the needs that I had, but obviously as other people joined and we saw the gaps that we have, what were those gaps that needed to come in? And, and so manage the growth of all these things. So when we needed to get somebody, I would usually kind of come in at the end to kind of see the last 3 or 4 people and interview those people with him, and so that took a big burden out of me. The dealings of the monthly meetings with the accountants and the lawyers, and like I said, we had a 350-page NDA. It's like, and then it was also like, okay, we need to bring producers because I can't be producing everything. So then that's when producers started coming into the studio, and then I was like, at the time, my role was creative director, and there was a moment where I was like, I cannot be the creative director. I'm sorry. And everyone kind of went, why? But you are. And it's like, I am not. Because if I'm the creative director, it means I'm across every single job that is passing through the company. And I'm not. I'm concentrating on this parts of it. Like Mooley's dealing with all this. PJ's dealing with all that. Someone was like, everybody was like, and I was like, I don't feel comfortable saying that I'm the creative director. Like, I'll be a director if that makes everyone happy. But I think that my role is actually, I am the artist. I'm the founder and the artist of the studio, and I feel more comfortable being an artist in that sense. And so it became a very tricky element of how do you make these decisions. But I was like, I didn't go to economic school, even though I talked to my mother a lot about these things. But I ended up talking to my mother more about leadership. Like, I remember when we moved into the studio, so this would be in August 2017, I remember having a crisis in October and deciding that I needed to talk to a psychologist. And I went and talked to a psychologist for the next probably 6 months because I, every other Friday, because I wasn't sure that I could be the leader that a team that big was going to need. I knew what was going to be asked out of me, and I wasn't sure because I had grown a company out of being a freelancer. So I knew my survival skills. I didn't know the survival skills that I needed to have in order to be a leader for 50, 60 people, because I could see that that's where we were heading. And, and this is, like I said, this is October. I mean, we just signed when I was like, crap, this is about to get real and it's going to be a lot of people. And so, I had to spend a lot of time learning how to be a leader for all of them, and to reshape my leadership skills and the things that I needed to do, and the places where I was allowed to go in and the places where I needed to take a step back and allow other people to flourish, to develop themselves. One of the things that I think I take a lot into heart is how many people that have left the studio are now in really important positions and that are growing and are are changing the way that we do many things in lighting and in 3D and in Unreal and all those kinds of things. I feel really, really proud of those people, because they, for better or for worse, they took a culture and they understood the culture of it, and I was able to, sometimes for good, sometimes not, to raise up to the occasion, to let them grow and to give them the tools for them to go on with their careers. And I think that's a very important moment that I understood in my career.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm enjoying this conversation so much, and I'm very sad that we don't have that much time left. I know a lot of people are hoping that we're going to talk a little bit about Unreal Fest. I think we probably have to have you back for a part 2, and we can go through Cosmos and Unique and Fallout and really do a deep dive into some of the specific projects you've worked on. But before we cover some Unreal Fest Prague, I think I just want to zoom out a little bit and ask you about client work versus your own personal work, because when I first really started to interact with you during Cosmos, I was so struck by what a personal project it was, and this was clearly not something that any client had asked you to do. This was coming from you, and you had assembled the team and the resources and the venues and everything needed to bring this to life. So when you approach either deciding whether to take on a client project or allocating those resources instead to something that you want to create, what kind of math is going through your head?
I have a clear math of 3 for them, 1 for me.
3 for them, 1 for you.
Yeah. So, for every 3 that, it's almost like I get a bonus point. Once I do 3 client jobs, I'm allowed to do 1 of mine, but mine would usually be more brood. Mine will go, I have a piece that I've been working on since 2004. And if it means that I get to spend 3 weeks of my budget to deliver that a little bit better, to grow it, then that's what it is. I always say that when we work for somebody, when you hire us to come in and do client work, I'm a designer. I'm an artist, but for you, I'm a designer. And the difference is, as an artist, it's my decision and the buck stops with me. And I make that last element. And you might like it, you might disagree with it, you might, whatever. But it's my name that is going up in the tin and the lights. And therefore, I get to make that last decision. When I'm working for a client, there's a lot of things that I don't know. So maybe I'm looking at something and I go, oh, it would look amazing in green and red. And they go, nope, it has to be blue and yellow. And you're like, but it looks amazing. It's like, yeah, but blue and yellow is the colors that we're going to use for the, it has an entire campaign behind it. And so you have to understand that there's, they know more about their brand. They know more about who they are and what they represent than you do. Because unless you've been working with that company, and that happens. Sometimes you have been working with that company for 15, 20 years, and you do really understand the ethos of it. But they know it better than you do. And I always say, it costs me exactly the same to do it green and red than it makes me to do it blue and yellow. That's the reality of it. It's just my ego that is getting in the middle of it. And so when I design for people, usually I try to check my ego at the door. And I'm just a facilitator. I'm someone who has an understanding about how to do things. And I am someone who can lead a team in order for us to achieve a goal. But you're hiring me for those skills.
I want to point out to our audience how rare Tupac as a person is, because we're talking about someone who has a very strong artistic vision, but can also put that ego aside and be more of a facilitator, help someone else with their vision. He's technical, he's creative, he's doing all these things where, at least in my career, I'm lucky if I can find someone who can handle 2 of those things well. I mean, especially coming from the world of architecture and dealing with starchitects who ostensibly are supposed to be serving their clients, like the crazy egos that, as I'm sure you've experienced as well, Tupac, can be insane with how much an architect wants to put their stamp of what this building should be. And sometimes it's more sculptural and it doesn't actually serve a function for the building. But, ostensibly you should be more of a facilitator in that role. And I'm surprised how often ego gets in the way of those things.
It does, but I think I would tell you that my ego used to get in front of me for a long time, and I was very, I'm very grateful. There's a senior principal called Nicholas Reynolds, and who works at Populous, and he taught me very hard how to check my ego. It was a very it wasn't easy, but it was one of those things of what is going to serve the architect best. Now, what's going to serve the architecture? What's going to serve the client, the needs of the client, and how are we going to solve this? And so I think that when when we do music, your artist is king or queen. Yeah. When you're doing fashion, the clothes are king. No one's coming to see your light show. They're coming to see the clothes, Yes, if you're seeing Radiohead, like me, I'll go, the music is amazing, but I'm also coming to see Andy Watson. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But I'm one out of 50,000, 60,000 people, maybe two of us, we're less than 1% of the whole thing. So they're not coming to see us, they're coming to see the way that they're designing within that space and how their job, what they do, enhances the story. I have this entire thing where I say technology is a character. And by that means that all the elements of if you pick a light or the type of server that you use or the type of machine or whatever you do, right? That's a character. It's the same way that the actor prepares to do all the other stuff that they do. And we do exactly the same thing. So I always say technology will never be the main character. Technology will always be the supporting act. And so by being a supporting actor, it will have its moment in the sun. It will have the scene that they're alone on screen. But the story is not about them. They're here to support the story that is being told, right? And I truly believe that when you're designing, that's exactly what you're trying to do. Whereas when you're an artist, you're trying to put a stake, you're trying to put a flag of this is where I am emotionally, this is where I am right now with me, this is what I believe that has to come out of me. And it's a very personal thing, and you put that flag in it. And then hopefully if you're lucky enough, you'll be able to turn around at the edge of a career and look at all the flags that you have left and see how those flags have been seen by others and helped others to move in their careers.
So many great quotes in here. Alan, our producer, I'm going to request that he assemble these into some nice little snippets with very, very thoughtful shots of Tupac with each of these quotes, to be inspiring to people. It'd be great. Really quickly, let's do a super fast lightning breakdown of Unreal Fest. Tupac, how was Prague? How was the event? What did you think of it?
Prague was great. Yeah. I love Prague. I went to Prague in 1992. That was when I went with my Minolta camera. When my mom gave it to me, that was one of the first places that I took pictures in. I love Prague. It's such a beautiful city. If you have never been, I cannot tell people enough about how beautiful it is. And then Unreal Fest, it was great, wasn't it? It was great to see, because a lot of times for Unreal Fest in the US, it becomes very difficult for a lot of the Europeans to go. So to have this really different mixture of people that you don't really see at the US Unreal Fest, it was quite nice. And also to meet like-minded people, because I think unlike the US, because at the end of the day, we're so many different countries in Europe, you kind of lose perspective about who's doing what. And so kind of having an event in which you can see everybody, that it's around, well, not everybody, but a good chunk of people that are dealing with the same things that you are, it's really, really interesting and really nice to meet. I've already met a couple of people that I was like, listen, I might have a shoot in Italy, I might call you, little things like that. So it's really, really nice.
Yeah, agreed. I thought it was a really lovely event, very well run. There was something, a blessing and a curse about it being centralized directly in the Hilton Prague, because it's amazing, everything's here. And some of us had a window that was literally facing into the atrium, so you never really felt like you were leaving Unreal Fest Europe. But it also did mean that there was never a good excuse to get out and explore the city, except for the party at the club on the final night there.
Yeah, I mean, I because I know Prague, I kind of stayed a little bit further out. And I arrived a couple of days earlier so that I could go and have sausages. I know, yeah. One of those things. But also because I have friends in there. It was amazing, walking around and finding little gardens that I've never heard about or moved about. But it's I thought, like you said, I think it was really it was a really good event, very well run. I'd never seen, Unreal Fest take over a hotel, which was weird.
Yeah,
everywhere you
branding
looked, it was
was
like,
everywhere.
branding everywhere. Like I can only imagine if you were not part of us and you arrived at the hotel, just kind of going, okay, who are these guys? Like I never had breakfast in the morning with the normal guests, but must have been really surreal for them to kind of be all around us.
Yeah.
But it was, I thought it was a fantastic. I think that, like I said, there's a few things that I missed that I really wanted to go see. There's some tips and things like that I got that I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. I'm actually hoping to use the new FOV that Ben Kitt presented for ICVFX, so that I can do depth of field on screen. So I'm shooting something in like 25 days. So I'm hoping that I can get that worked into my program, to my project. Because it'd be really, really cool. Because you never know when you're going to use it. You never know when you're going to need it. But yeah, I thought that the only moment that was really weird. I don't know if were you with us when we went out with the UFN people.
I don't think so. No.
So there was just one moment where fair play to this guys. It's like they're twins and they've made like so much money in UFN, and there's like all these 40-year-olds just sitting around going, Jesus, you're a millionaire. It's like, damn, I should have gotten to UFN a long earlier than this. But, like I said, I discovered certain things talking to them. And obviously, like, just because you can make money, it doesn't mean that it's the right thing for you to do. That's the way that I felt about it. And, but nonetheless, I was like, I think that, if I do look at something and I think it's interesting, I might create an island. But, I don't know. Maybe I always say I'm too old to play Fortnite at the moment, so I might as well just stay away. And then unless something comes in, and you never know, it might be a client, or it might be like I go, oh, let me have a try of this and see what this is all about. And I might be able to create an island that no one's really thinking that exists or needs to exist, and maybe that then it comes out. But yeah, it's something.
Yeah, I'm sure the way you would approach an island would be so different from what anyone else has done. And going back to your experiences with John and having your left hand tied down or whatever, like there's the restrictions you have in UEFN compared to Unreal. I'd be really interested to see how you and your team would work around those to create something new and I'm sure incredible.
Yeah, it's really funny you say that. I'm currently testing a plugin that I won't even call it beta. It's probably like in gamma at this moment, way down the line. And I was like, I think that this one, if I could make it work the way I want it, that could potentially be something that I could put into an island. I think that's the first time that I looked at something and went, and this is a plugin that I got given Friday. I had a little of a play this weekend, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. I was like, it's very, very, very buggy. But it was one of those things I went, this could be actually an interesting thing to use and to play around with. And if this works, I could potentially now see myself making an island, So you never know. Maybe in 6 months ago, I had a long conversation with Haas about this and, about making islands. And that was the nice part about, about going to Unreal Fest, as it always is, meeting and seeing friends and seeing people that you don't really get a chance to see. Like, I haven't seen you since last Unreal Fest in New Orleans, and
last Unreal Fest, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so it's always really nice to see friends and see people and catch up. And because obviously there's the things that you publish that are there. And then there's the things that you go, oh, I'm working this crazy thing. Any ideas about how to make it work? So that kind of thing.
Yeah. And we should give a shout out to Jacob, who kindly took Tupac and I and the TensorWork folks out to dinner at Unreal Fest. And that was a really lovely evening. We had a good time.
Oh, it's amazing dinner. That's the only thing that I was like, oh, we're not going to go to New Orleans. We can't go there anymore. Damn. But, we'll find something else in Seattle.
Yeah. The seafood there is also very good, I hear. So I'm sure we'll be fine. I know we're a little bit over time.
It is very good.
Do you think, Tupac, you can give us like a 10-second long story of a thing that happened while you were working on Fallout?
Let me think of something that I can tell you that is already public, so I don't have to
Right.
break any NDAs.
Maybe like a problem you had to solve that was like a really weird random thing that happened
there's
on the
one
day.
there's one that got told, which is when at the end of the shoot, almost, we got approached by the director because he had an idea about how to do the whole element when Kyle MacLachlan was going to arrive to Vegas, and it was something that we put together in about 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, where he came with the idea, and this tells you how much of a well-oiled machine we were, because he came to us and went, I have been greenlit to do this. Can we do this, and that? And it was just like, okay, we have nothing. But, okay, Magnopa's VAT team, you guys had this scene that was this, yes, okay, pull it out from the Perforce. PK, there's this bit, that bit, yeah. He's like, okay, start pulling that into it so we can integrate that level into that. Jeff, you keep doing the thing because you're basically, doing TA for the shoot. Vishal, start doing the same merger that he's doing, but then pull this element from here so I can use that lighting. Brady, you know that toy that we built that we haven't used yet? Yeah, so pull that out again so we can do this again. And so I was like, just go over there and I'll let Berto and Kaylin know when we can show you something, And all of a sudden you had like 5 different teams working together, And there wasn't like talking to Fuse. It was just, guys, elements in here that I can use, like, here. So it was just like the way that we were all working together. And then about 30 minutes later, there was a break. And I told Berto, I was like, can you tell the director to come out? And so he comes out and he sees it. And we had made a fake camera to kind of show the movement. And we're like, is this the kind of thing that you want to do? And he's like, no. But if you do this and pull down and do this and do that, it's like, okay. So that team, blah, 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 blah. And we got it all sorted in about 30, 45 minutes, And it was like, okay, we have it. Now we just need a break so we can pull that out from Perforce and give it to all the machines and do all this other bits, And that was like, wow. And this is the last day of our shoot. Oh, wow. So that, it told you how well of an oil machine we were, that it was just like, okay, every single person that is working right now, we've spent the last 5.5 months of our life working together. And it shows. It shows because we are very much in sync of how do we work? How do we complement each other so that we're not running on top of each other, but we're building from everything that we have and understanding the things that are there that we haven't used for a reason, or maybe it was a test, or, and basically what we ended up pulling was a test that we had done earlier for other things, and it worked really, really well. And that's the kind of volume that you want to be working with, where everyone in the salad bar is just, Yeah.
And what I'm also hearing there too, if it was the last day of the shoot, is you weren't all completely burnt out. You were still firing on all cylinders and able to think, creatively. And I know a lot of people who by the end of a shoot, they can barely chew on their lunch, let alone come up with new innovative solutions. So that's also really cool.
Yeah, but I think it came from understanding, like, once again, from understanding the way that we were working and how we could actually help each other. So if you needed help, you can just raise, like, there's one moment on the last day of the shoot where, we did, I think our last block was like 7 days of shoot or something like that. And, in order to move around the set, because we were in the observatory, so we couldn't see inside. Our looms were huge, like we had long looms to get everywhere. And so if it was going to be a big move, that unless we needed somebody, like the 2 TAs will stay there, the rest of us would go in and help move looms, because it was, the quicker we can get them to the other side, the faster that everyone can just take a little bit of a break. And so if I wasn't being used, we would go in and jump and help each other. I remember that one day, the joke was always, if you see me inside the volume, means something's gone wrong. That's why I always stay the hell out. I was never inside the volume. I always stayed outside the volume. And then at one moment, Berto calls and says, Bert and Kaylin needed some help. And they're like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm sitting here. What do you guys need? And they're like, we need you to go in and mark where the camera goes for the next 3 hours. So I'm just sitting there, a guy with a gaffer. That's all I was doing. I was going in and marking every single place where the camera was so that we can go and remeasure everything so we can give that data. And, once again, I was outside of the volume just watching. And then as soon as the camera finished, I would go in and mark it and then come out and mark it and then come out, And someone asked me, is this the best use of your job? And I was like, this is apparently the best use that these guys need me right now. And if this is going to make their lives easier so they can concentrate on the shoot, then that's what I need to do, There's a funny story in the studio where one day Wednesdays used to be hot dog day in the studio. Okay. And so my prize, the first thing that I ever bought when I got my first studio was a hot dog machine. Don't ask me why. I just thought that having a hot dog machine was the coolest thing to have. And so Wednesdays became hot dog day. And so I don't remember why I had to come in really early that morning. And so I didn't buy some of the things that I needed for the hot dogs. And so as I'm sitting there, all of a sudden, this is the hype of the studio where there's 60 people working nonstop. One of them, Liam, turns around to me and goes, "Are we doing hot dogs today?" And I was like, "Yes, but I forgot this." Okay. So I turned to our studio manager and I was like, "Marta, any chance you can pop to Tesco's, to the supermarket, to buy mustard and ketchup and sausages because we ran out of blah, blah, blah." And she goes, "I'm kind of busy. I'm finishing something for the accountants." I was like, "Okay." And then Ruben, he was like, "I can, but unless you want to do this." And I went basically through everybody and I was like, well, then nobody else can do it. And nobody needs me. Yeah. So I'm going to go to the supermarket and buy all this. So here I am coming back from the supermarket, strolling really, really easily through the park, because the supermarket was on that side, park, my studio. And as I'm coming back to the studio, I get a phone call from the principal, from Nick Radels. And he goes, "Hey, mate." I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" He goes, "Well, what are you up to?" It's like, "I'm just walking back from the supermarket. I went to get hot dogs and mustard and ketchup for hot dogs for hot dog day." Is there anybody else in your studio who could do this? Like, apparently not. Apparently this is what I had to do today. He's like, "All right, cool. Speaking an hour for your call?" Yeah, speaking an hour for the call.
I love that.
So,
Yeah. Well, they say the job of a good leader is just to remove barriers so your team can do their jobs well. And if everyone else had more important things to be doing, I think it's a good sign that the best thing you could do is get them hot dogs.
Exactly. So, but yeah, there's quite a few stories on Fallout that I think eventually will start coming out once we get a little bit of clearance from the powers to be. There's quite a lot of workflows that we would like to hopefully share with people in terms of what we did, and shout outs to a lot of people that did some brilliant work, from the way that the volume was built, and with Fuse, the stuff that Magnopus and all the VAT team was doing, which was just fantastic, and then the coordination into it. Obviously, Berto and the whole All of It Now team, which was just like spot on in terms of the things that we were doing and the way that we were innovating, and so it's a really nice show to look at and go, that looks good, and to see people really liking it, so it's really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, I know Jacob is super sad he couldn't make this discussion, so we have to find a way to get you back for part 2, maybe once some of those clearances have happened, and we'll do a deep dive on some of this stuff. But I want to thank Tupac so much for all of his time on today's episode. Thanks to Vikas and Gustavo and everyone at Light Twist for our studio, Alan, our producer. And Tupac, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Handles are different because, the social medias are different, but most of them are at Tupac Martir and at Satori Studio.
Yeah, cool. And we'll put some good links in the show notes of the things you should all check out. And there's so much more we could be talking about. I feel like we barely scratched the tip of the iceberg here of the we
didn't even talk about the engine, which is the hardest one.
Yeah, we didn't even get into when did Tupac first try Unreal Engine, which is one of our standard questions. So we'll save all that for part 2. But thanks everyone so much for listening. Be sure to rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next time. Tupac, any final words for our listeners out there? Any words of inspiration? Anything else we can throw up on a quote
keep
page?
Failing and
keep failing. That's a good one. Great.
It's the only way.
Yeah, keep failing, everyone. Don't be afraid. It's going to be fine. Till next time. See you all later. Goodbye.